Helga Grebing was born on the 27th of February 1930 and died on the 25th of September 2017. She was an award-winning German historian and university professor, Göttingen, Bochum. A focus of her work is on social history and, more specifically, on the history of the labor movement. Grebing was born in Pankow, a district in south-central Berlin. Her father worked in the building trade. His background was Roman Catholic. On more than one occasion she has referred to her paternal grandmother, without wishing to sound negative, as a bigot Catholic, Eigenlicht bigot Katholisch. Her mother was a factory worker, with a non-dogmatic Protestant background. Later she switched jobs, moving into the food retailing sector. Grebing grew up in and around Berlin. Her father was involved in a traffic accident when she was 5 and was badly burned. A burn turned septic, and he died of the resulting blood poisoning. After this she relocated with her mother to live with relatives in the nearby district of Meersdorf. She attended school in the area, including a spell at the commercially oriented secondary school, Handelsschule, in Berlin-Neukölln. War provided the backdrop for her early teenage years. During the final 2 years of the war, all the schools in the area were closed and she worked as an armaments worker in Wildau at the huge Schwarzkopf locomotive plant. She was also at this time in the BDM, National Youth Organization for Girls. She later said that it was her experience of this organization which sensitized her very early on to the potential for a return dictatorship inherent in the circumstances surrounding and following the creation of the Socialist Unity Party (SED) in April 1946. War ended in May 1945 and in 1946 she completed her schooling, emerging with a qualification for clerical work. Directly after that, now aged 16 and the youngest in her cohort, Grebing responded to a newspaper advertisement and enrolled at the Workers' and Farmers' Faculty, a department of Berlin University, where she received a more academically focused year of secondary schooling and in 1947 received her Abitur, which opened the way for a university-level education. This was part of an unusual scheme that was expressly aimed at school leavers to whom the opportunity of a university education would have been denied during the Nazi years on ground of politics, race or social background. 2. Admission to the course involved an exam. One of her examiners was Hilde Benjamin, a name which later came to wider prominence in connection with the East German show trials of the early 1950s. 2. She moved on to the main university where she studied history, Germanistics, philosophy and civil law. In 1948 she joined the Social Democratic Party (SPD). During the early post-war years, a young activist in the Berlin SPD, recently returned from a wartime exile in Norway, was Willy Brandt, with whom at times Grebing found herself working closely on party matters. Much later she would publish a biography of Brandt. The war had ended with Germany divided into military occupation zones. Berlin itself was similarly subdivided. Berlin University had ended up in the Soviet occupation zone, and as NKVD activities within the university intensified, and the nature and extent of the Berlin's political and economic division continued to crystallize. In 1949 Grebing was one of several thousand able to transfer to the newly launched Free University of Berlin set up in the city's U.S. Western sector. Here she pursued her studies for her doctorate, which she received at the end of 1952. She was supervised by Hans Herzfeld. Her dissertation concerned the Catholic Center Party and the working classes in the Weimar Republic. Between 1953 and 1959 she worked as an editor for contemporary history and politics with the Munich publisher Zollzog Verlag. She was also working as an editor for the Munich-based academic journal, Politische Studien. From 1958 she was also teaching at the Academy for Political Education in Tutzing and at other educational institutions operated by the West German Trades Union Confederation and the SPD party. She was also involved in teacher training. Between 1959 and 1961 Grebing headed the Hans and Sophie Scholl International Student Accommodation Center, and was at the same time active in the working group of Social Democratic Academics Arbeitsgemeinschaftssozialdemokratischer Akademiker in Munich. Between 1961 and 1965 she was a department chief at the massive Munich Popular Academy Münchner Volkshochschule, with departmental responsibility for politics, sociology, contemporary history, economics and law. Between 1964 and 1966 she undertook consultancy work for the Hessen State Political Education Center. Grebing has worked as a biographer and as a literary executor. She co-edited a volume published of the writings of the art historian Wilhelm Waringer. Her biography of Willy Brandt appeared in 2000.